Grace wasn't just beautiful. She was the kind of woman who made time slow down when she entered a room. She was tall and curvy in all the right places with a skin that glowed. She carried herself like a queen who didn't need a crown. Her colleagues at work had long grown used to her presence, yet the effect never wore off. Men stumbled over their words whenever she walked past. Some held their breath as if inhaling her perfume could make them drunk. Even the women, though were sometimes jealous, couldn't deny the fact that Grace was different. She wore her beauty with the kind of effortlessness that made it dangerous. A fitted pencil skirt hugged her hips, and her blouse clung just enough to remind every man of her curves without being indecent. Her long braids swung gently behind her as she walked, a rhythm that matched her confident stride. And yet, for all her beauty, she remained untouchable. She smiled politely but kept her distance. She was friendly but never flirted. When invitations to go on a date came, she declined with the same gentle firmness. To most, she seemed like a woman with impossibly high standards. But Grace carried a secret far darker than pride. "Good morning, Grace," one of the male bankers called out, his voice a little too tense. Grace smiled politely, the corners of her lips curving in a way that made his heart race. "Morning," she replied before moving past him without breaking her stride. That was how it always was. Men tried. Grace smiled. And then she moved on. By the time she reached her desk, a few of her female colleagues had already exchanged knowing glances. "I don't understand her," whispered Ngozi, adjusting her glasses as she leaned close to her friend. "All the fine men in this office and outside are dying to date her. Yet she acts like she doesn't notice." "Maybe she's secretly married," the friend replied. "Or maybe she thinks none of them are good enough." Grace, seated at her desk, pretended not to hear them. She had grown used to the whispers. Some people thought she was arrogant. Others suspected she had a secret lover somewhere. But none of them knew the truth. None of them could ever understand why she kept her distance. Because the truth was too heavy, too terrifying to share. Grace glanced at a photo that popped up on her phone from her Snapchat memory. It was a photo of her with a man. He was handsome. He had been her first real boyfriend back when she was 20. They had been inseparable. He had promised her the world. And Grace believed him. But 3 weeks after they first made love, he was dead. A car accident on 3rd Mainland Bridge. The police had called it bad luck, but Grace had called it fate. She had tried again 3 times. Different men. Different promises. And it always resulted in death. Now at 27, Grace had stopped trying. She had learned her lesson. But the world refused to leave her alone. Men still chased her. Men still begged. And loneliness still crept into her life at night. That evening, after closing hours, Grace walked out of the bank and onto the bustling streets of Lagos. Hawkers shouted at the roadside, selling roasted corn and groundnuts. Okada riders honked impatiently, riding recklessly between cars. And yet, in all the chaos, Grace still stood out. Men on the street paused to watch her. One even muttered under his breath, "Ah, see as God create this one. If I marry her, my life dawn's set." Grace kept walking, her face expressionless. She had heard it all before. Compliments had become meaningless. Her phone buzzed in her handbag. He pulled it out. A message flashed on the screen. "Good evening, beautiful. Can I take you out for dinner tonight?" From Femi. Grace sighed. Femi was her colleague, tall and charming, the kind of man other women dreamed of. He had been trying for months, and today's message was his 5th attempt in 2 weeks. Grace typed back, "Thank you, but I can't." Almost immediately the reply came, Why do you always say no? Don't you get lonely? Her fingers froze on the keypad. The word lonely stabbed at her. She was lonely. Terribly lonely. Every night she went home to an empty apartment, cooked alone, ate alone, watched TV alone. She longed for companionship, for laughter, for someone to share her burdens with. But how could she explain? How could she tell him that dinner might lead to intimacy and intimacy might lead to his death? She slipped her phone back into her bag without replying. As Grace stopped a taxi and sat at the back seat, she stared out at the busy Lagos traffic. Hawkers running between vehicles shouting prices. But all Grace could think about was the same haunting question that visited her every night. Will I ever be free of this curse? Or am I doomed to spend my life alone? Grace tried to keep her walls up, but loneliness was eating her up. Every night after work, she went home to her one-bedroom apartment in Surulere, ate in silence while the noise of Lagos filtered through her window. She had friends, yes, but they didn't fill the loneliness inside her. Married women pitied her, single women envied her, and men never stopped chasing. Among those men was Femi. Femi was her colleague in the bank's IT department, tall and broad-shouldered, with a ready smile and an easy sense of humor. He had patience, the kind that disarmed her defenses. He brought her breakfast sometimes. Just thought you might not have had time to cook, he would say casually. He offered to walk her to the staff bus. He never forced conversations, but when he spoke, Grace found herself laughing. Against her better judgment, she said yes when he asked her out for coffee. It was supposed to be harmless. Just coffee and a conversation. Nothing dangerous, he thought. That Saturday afternoon, they met at a quiet cafe on the island. Grace wore a simple yellow dress, her braids pulled back, but still she drew stares the moment she walked in. Femi's chest swelled with pride as other men's eyes followed her to their table. You look beautiful, he said. Grace smiled softly. Thank you. They talked for hours. About work, childhood memories, even their dreams for the future. For the first time in years, Grace felt almost normal and free. By the time Femi drove her home, it was already dark. He parked outside her gate and turned to her. Grace, I don't know why you've kept me at arm's length all this while. But today, he reached for her hand. I felt something real between us. Grace's chest tightened. She liked him more than she wanted to admit. But she knew where this road could lead. So she pulled her hand back and spoke in a low, trembling voice. Femi, if we're going to do this, I need you to understand something. I don't do intimacy. No sex. Not now, not ever. Femi blinked. He was surprised. Then he said, That's fine. I can wait. I like you, Grace. I'm not going anywhere. His words warmed her. For once, maybe this could work. Weeks turned into months. They grew closer. Femi took her to different places, to the cinema, the beach. He made her laugh until her sides ached. He respected her boundaries, at least in the beginning. But as their bond grew stronger, so did his desire. One evening, after walking her home, he stood in the doorway. Grace, he said softly, I love you. I want to be with you completely. Her stomach dropped. She shook her head. Femi, we've talked about this. I know, he said, his voice strained. But we're adults. We love each other. Why should we hold back? Grace swallowed hard. She wanted to protest, to push him away. But the truth was she also wanted him. He was tired of resisting, tired of being alone. That night, against her wish, she let him stay. For a few days after, Grace felt almost happy. She woke up in Femi's arms, convinced maybe this time it would be different. Maybe the curse had ended. But then it started. A week later, Femi complained of headaches. He brushed them off. 2 days after that, he collapsed at work. The hospital said it was a brain aneurysm. It was sudden and fatal. Grace was shattered. She stood over his coffin at the funeral, her tears soaking the black lace wrapper she wore. Colleagues whispered behind her back. Some pitied her. Some accused her. Have you noticed? Every man that gets close to her, something happens. Grace heard the whispers but said nothing. Her heart was too heavy with guilt. When she got home that evening, she shut herself in her room, lay on her bed and cried until she had chest pain. "Why me?" she cried. "What did I do to deserve this?" But the walls offered no answer. Only silence, heavy and suffocating. Grace knew then that this was not coincidence. Not bad luck. Not fate. It was a curse. And she had to find a way to break it, before it destroyed her completely. The night after Femi's burial, Grace could not sleep. She tossed and turned in her bed, her pillow damp with tears. She replayed the last days of his life in her mind. The way he had complained of headaches, the sudden collapse at work, the sound of the doctor's voice saying, "We lost him." It was the same pattern again. Her first boyfriend had died in a car crash. The second, from malaria that worsened suddenly. The third, a freak accident at a construction site. And now Femi, an aneurysm no one had seen coming. It was no longer coincidence. By morning, Grace sat up in her living room, her eyes swollen but her mind made up. If this was a curse, then it had to be broken. She would try everything and anything. She was tired of watching men she cared about die. Her search began with the church. That Sunday, instead of attending her usual service, she went to a popular deliverance ministry she had heard about on the radio. The pastor was known for his fire prayers and dramatic deliverances. Grace wore a simple dress, blending into the crowd of thousands who had gathered. When it was her turn during prayer line, she knelt before the pastor. He looked into her eyes and frowned deeply as though he saw something. "My daughter," he said, his voice booming through the microphone, "you are under the bondage of a spirit husband. That is why every man that sleeps with you dies. The demon is jealous. It will never allow you to be with another man." Gasps filled the congregation. The pastor continued, "But there is deliverance. For a seed of faith of 200,000 naira you will be free." Grace's heart sank. She had heard of such things before, deliverance that came with a price tag. Still, desperation made her agree. She transferred the money and submitted to the prayers, rolling on the floor as ushers shouted, "Fire! Fire!" above her head. But when she left that day, she felt no different. Weeks passed. Another admirer tried to get close. Grace, weak from loneliness, allowed him into her life. She was careful at first but became vulnerable later. Within a month he was dead. The pastor's deliverance had failed. Grace grew restless. She sought out another church, this time a smaller prayer group in Mushin. The prophet there was an old man with a white beard who spoke in parables and riddles. "My daughter," he said after praying for her, "your mother's people tied your destiny long ago. They did not want you to enjoy marriage. Until you bring a white goat and 7 yards of white cloth with the sum of 100,000 naira, nothing will change." Grace was surprised. A goat? White cloth? It sounded like ritual more than prayer. So she obeyed. She spent her savings again. Nothing changed. When the churches failed, Grace's desperation drove her further, to the path of a native doctor recommended by a colleague's cousin. The shrine was dark, lit only by oil lamps. Wooden images lined on the walls. The native doctor, a short man with sharp eyes, listened to Grace's story in silence. When she finished, he nodded slowly. You are carrying the mark of an ancient covenant. Someone in your lineage offended the gods. Their punishment is on you. Can it be broken? Grace whispered. He grinned, revealing red-stained teeth from chewing cola. Of course. But it will not be cheap. You must buy a black ram, 3 bottles of gin, and 300,000 naira for the sacrifice. Grace felt her heart sink. Her bank account was already bleeding, but fear made her agree. That night she watched as the man slaughtered the ram, chanting incantations as its blood spilled onto the dusty floor. He rubbed some on her forehead and declared her free. For the first time she dared to hope. But a month later, when another man she had cautiously allowed into her heart died of sudden food poisoning, Grace broke down completely. Her apartment became a prison. She sat on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by bottles of anointing oil, prayer handkerchiefs, and charms she had bought. None of them worked. Her money was gone. Her hope was fading. And the voice of people gossiping about her grew louder. At work, she overheard colleagues whispering, "I'm telling you, every man that goes near her dies. It's not ordinary." Then why are men still chasing her? Because she's beautiful. Some men will risk death for a woman like that. Grace buried her face in her hands. She was tired of the rumors, tired of the loneliness, tired of fighting a curse that seemed stronger than her will. One evening, as she sat staring blankly at her wall, a message came from an unknown number. "Hello, Grace. My name is Michael. I don't know if you believe in destiny, but I believe God led me to you." Grace stared at the message, her chest beating fast. Another man. Another risk. She should block him immediately. She should save his life before it was too late, he thought. And yet, her fingers moved over the screen, trembling. Because deep inside her heart, despite all the pain, loneliness still whispered. And for the first time in a long while, Grace thought, what if this one is different? By the time Grace turned 28, her life was a paradox. She had everything most women her age dreamed of. A good job in the city, a stylish apartment, a body that made men turn their heads wherever she went. Her curves filled out her dresses in all the right places, her skin glowed effortlessly, and her smile could disarm even the proudest man. And yet, she was the loneliest woman in the world. The problem wasn't that men didn't want her. The problem was that too many had already died after getting too close. It started quietly. At first, people thought it was bad luck, coincidence. A few boyfriends passing away, no one really asked questions. But after the 4th and 5th, rumors began to spread like wildfire. "Have you heard about that fine girl in human resources?" One staff whispered at work. "You mean Grace?" "Yes. My guy told me every man who dates her dies mysteriously. Car accident, sickness, one even fell from a balcony." "Eh? So it's true?" "I thought it was just gossip." "It's true. They say she's cursed. Or maybe she's a witch." Grace heard the whispers. She saw the way some women avoided her in the office corridor, as though her shadow alone could kill. She noticed the way men joked about her behind her back. But the hardest part was when one bold colleague confronted her in the break room. "Grace, don't be offended," the lady said, lowering her voice. "But, is it true? Do your boyfriends really die?" Grace froze, her hand halfway to her cup of coffee. She forced a smile. "People say all kinds of things when they're jealous." The woman continued. "I don't think it's jealousy. You're beautiful, yes, but so many men. All dead. It's strange. Grace turned away, fighting tears. She had no explanation or defense. But even with the whispers, men still chased her. Some were drawn by her beauty, others by curiosity, and a few by arrogance, belief that they could survive where others had failed. One evening, as Grace left work in a fitted navy blue dress and heels, a car slowed down beside her. A man in a crisp suit leaned out of the window, flashing a confident smile. "Excuse me, beautiful. Can I give you a ride?" Grace barely glanced at him. "No, thank you. Come on, don't be shy. I'm not a stranger. I work in finance just down the road. You look too classy to be walking alone." Grace shook her head firmly and kept walking. The man didn't know he was trying to walk into death. That night, lying on her bed, Grace scrolled through her phone, rereading the strange message from the unknown number. "Hello, Grace. My name is Michael. I don't know if you believe in destiny, but I believe God led me to you." She had ignored it at first, but now she felt her heart beating. Something about the words was different. He hadn't complimented her body or called her sexy. He had spoken about destiny, about God. Still, fear wrapped around her chest like a rope. She whispered to herself, "If I let him in, he will die too. Just like the others." Her phone buzzed again. Another message came from the same number. "I don't want to disturb you, but I had a dream about you last night. In the dream, you were crying, surrounded by people who didn't understand you. And then a hand reached down and pulled you out. I believe God wants me to pray for you." Grace sat up, goosebumps covering her skin. This was no ordinary man. The next week at work was torture. Everywhere she went, people stared. Some out of desire, others out of fear. One young intern whispered loudly to another as she walked past the reception, "See as she fine die. But me, I can't try it. I still love my life." The other laughed nervously. "You're wise. Forget her beauty. That woman is a death trap." Grace walked faster, her heels clicking on the tiles. Each word was a dagger in her heart. By the time she got home, she collapsed on her bed and cried. She was tired of being admired for her beauty, but feared for her curse at the same time. Her phone buzzed again. Michael's message popped up. "Grace, please don't be afraid. I don't know your story, but I know pain when I see it. Let us meet. Even if it's just for coffee. I promise, no pressure." Grace hesitated, her heart pounding. If she let him in, would he die too? Or was this the man who could finally change her story? It was a Saturday afternoon in a quiet cafe in Surulere. She chose the place deliberately, far from her office, far from the eyes of colleagues, far from the gossips. She arrived first, sitting by the window in a flowing peach blouse and dark jeans. Her hair fell neatly over her shoulders. Her lips painted a soft shade of red. She looked calm on the outside, but inside she was nervous. What if he dies too? What if I'm walking him straight into death? She kept asking herself and almost stood to leave, but then she saw him. Michael walked in, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple white shirt and black trousers. His presence was quiet yet commanding, like someone who didn't need to announce himself. His eyes met hers across the room, and in that moment, Grace felt peaceful in a way she hasn't felt in years. He smiled warmly and walked over. "Grace." She nodded. "Yes. Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you will come." Grace forced a smile. "I almost didn't want to come." The conversation flowed more easily than she expected. Unlike other men, Michael didn't shower her with compliments about her looks. He asked about her work, her family, her dreams. When she answered, he listened, leaning forward with genuine interest. After an hour, Grace found herself laughing at his jokes, forgetting for a brief moment the heavy curse hanging over her life. But then when he reached across the table to touch her hand, she panicked and pulled back abruptly. Michael frowned. "Did I do something wrong?" Grace shook her head quickly and said, No, I don't like people touching me." It was a lie and she hated herself for it. But what else could she say? "Touch me and you will die?" Over the next few weeks, Michael persisted gently. He called her in the evenings, sent her encouraging Bible verses in the mornings, and even surprised her once with a bouquet of flowers delivered to her office. Her colleagues watched with wide eyes. "So Grace has finally agreed to date someone again?" Someone asked. "Let's see how long this one lasts," another replied. Grace ignored them, but the fear in her heart grew heavier each day. Michael was kind. He was patient. He didn't pressure her for intimacy the way the others did. But Grace knew the pattern. Sooner or later he would want more. And once she gave in, the curse would take him too. One Friday evening, Michael invited her to dinner at his apartment. Grace almost said no, but she was alone at home and bored. She dressed carefully, a simple gown, nothing too provocative, and arrived at his place. The moment she stepped inside, she felt at ease. His home was warm, filled with books, framed photos of family. While having dinner, they laughed and talked until Grace forgot herself. But when Michael tried to kiss her, his lips just inches from hers, she panicked. "No!" she shouted, standing abruptly. Michael froze, confusion clouding his face. "Grace, what's wrong? Did I offend you?" Her chest heaved. Tears filled her eyes. She shook her head, unable to find words. Michael stood slowly, his expression soft. "Grace, I don't know what you're hiding, but I can see you're in pain. You don't have to tell me now." "No, I'm not going anywhere." Grace stared at him, trembling. His words pierced straight into her heart. No man had ever said that to her before. And for the first time in her life, she wanted to desperately believe him. That night, lying in her bed, Grace cried silently. She thought about the pastors who failed her, the native doctors who drained her money, the boyfriends who died, the whispers at work. And then she thought of Michael. He was different. He wasn't chasing her body, he cared about her soul. But how could she tell him the truth? How could she confess that every man who touched her ended up in a coffin? If she stayed silent, she risked killing him. If she opened up, she risked losing the only man she had ever truly wanted to keep. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "Grace, I don't know what demons you're fighting, but I want you to know, I'm ready to fight them with you." Grace pressed the phone to her chest and whispered into the empty room, "Lord, please don't let me lose him too." That evening, she gathered all the courage in her heart and went to Michael's house. Sitting on his couch, her hands trembling, she finally let the words fall from her lips. "Michael, every man who has dated me, every man who has ever slept with me, they all died. One after the other. I thought it was bad luck at first, but it can't be. There's something following me. And I'm scared you might be next." Michael sat still, there was no mockery or judgment in his eyes. Only a quiet determination. He reached out for her hands. "Grace, you should have told me sooner. This is not your battle alone. If it is spiritual, then we will fight it spiritually. You will not carry this shame forever." 2 days later, Michael took her to a deliverance service in a small prayer house at the edge of the city. The night was heavy with the sound of drums and fervent prayers. Grace knelt, shaking as the pastor laid hands on her. The voices of intercession rose like thunder. She screamed as if something inside her was removed, her body rolling on the cold floor. Michael stood close, praying with tears in his eyes. "She will not die like this, Lord." When the session was over, Grace was tired but felt lighter, as though chains had been broken off her soul. Michael knelt beside her, holding her hand. "From today," he whispered, "you are free. And we will walk this freedom together." 4 days after the deliverance, Grace felt like she was floating. The heaviness that lived in her chest for years was gone. She no longer woke up with dread or went to bed in fear. For the first time since she was a teenager, she could breathe without the invisible weight pressing down on her. She walked into her office on Monday morning glowing, her colleagues whispering as usual. But this time she didn't care. Their stares didn't break her spirit, because she knew something they didn't know. She was free. Michael remained by her side every step of the way. He prayed with her, encouraged her, and reminded her daily, "Whom the Son sets free is free indeed." Grace tested her freedom slowly. She allowed Michael to hold her hand, to hug her, even to kiss her gently, and they eventually became intimate. Each time she waited in fear for tragedy to strike. But nothing happened. A week passed and then 2 months, and Michael was still alive. Still strong and smiling at her with love in his eyes. The curse was truly broken. At work, people began to notice the change. Grace walked with confidence now, no longer hiding behind silence. Some whispered that she had found another man and that he would soon die like the rest. But months passed and Michael was alive. One afternoon, a bold colleague pulled her aside. "Grace," she said cautiously, "forgive me, but how come this one is still alive?" Grace smiled, her eyes shining. "Because I am free." The colleague blinked, confused. "How?" Grace simply answered, "God set me free." And for once she didn't care whether they believed her or not. The day Michael proposed was the happiest of her life. He knelt in front of her at the same cafe where they first met, holding out a simple but elegant ring. "Grace," he said, his voice steady, "you are the strongest woman I have ever known. You've fought battles most people couldn't survive. But more importantly, you've shown me what real faith looks like. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." The cafe erupted in cheers. For the first time, Grace felt truly chosen, not for her beauty alone but for her heart, her resilience, her soul. The wedding day came months later, held in a bright church filled with flowers and music. Grace walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, radiant and unafraid. The whispers of the past no longer mattered. The curse was gone and the world would see it with their own eyes. Michael stood at the altar, his smile wide, his eyes shining with love. When their hands joined and the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Grace felt a surge of joy so powerful it nearly knocked her off her feet. The congregation erupted in applause, some crying, some shaking their heads in disbelief. But Grace didn't hear them. She only heard Michael's voice, whispering into her ear as he kissed her hand. "You're free, Grace. Forever free." And this time she knew it was true.